I wasn't looking for another woman. In fact, I wasn't looking for anything at all, other than a place to disintegrate in peace. My sister Chloe's guest room, with its floral wallpaper and a window that overlooked a perpetually damp patch of lawn, seemed as good a place as any. The drive up had been a blur of gray highway and the ghosts of arguments replaying on a loop in my head. Sasha's voice, sharp and final. My own, begging, then breaking. The sound of a door closing, a lock turning. It had only been a week, but my life had been hollowed out, leaving behind a ringing silence and the acrid taste of failure. I had loved a woman, and she had unloved me. It felt like a fundamental law of physics had been broken. The house was quiet when I let myself in with the spare key Chloe had mailed me. A note on the kitchen counter read, "Ilara, help yourself to anything, had to run to the city for a couple days for work. Back Thursday. So glad you're here. We'll talk. Love, C." Of course. Chloe, ever the whirlwind, her life a series of urgent appointments and last-minute trips. It was for the best. I didn't have the energy for concerned sisterly interrogations yet. I just wanted to crawl into bed and let the world spin on without me. I dropped my duffel bag by the door, the sound echoing in the stillness. The house smelled of lemon polish and old books, Chloe's signature scent. But underneath it, there was something else, faint but distinct, the clean, earthy fragrance of freshly cut wood. I wandered into the living room, drawn by a sliver of light from the back porch, and there she was. Framed by the screen door, a silhouette against the fading twilight, was a woman I hadn't seen in years. Anya, Chloe's best friend since college. She was sanding a piece of what looked like maple, her movements steady and hypnotic. She wore a plain gray t-shirt, taut across her shoulders, and faded jeans dusted with sawdust. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy knot, and even from a distance, I could see the focused line of her jaw. She was always the quiet one in their duo, the anchor to Chloe's kite. The last time I'd seen her was at a disastrous Christmas party 3 years ago, where Sasha had gotten drunk and picked a fight with one of Chloe's friends. Anya had quietly refilled my water glass and asked if I was okay, her eyes holding a calm sympathy that felt more grounding than anything else that night. I hadn't thought of her since. Now, seeing her here, in the quiet sanctuary of my sister's home, felt like an intrusion, a complication I hadn't budgeted for. She must have sensed me because she stopped sanding and turned, her expression unreadable in the dim light. She wiped a hand on her jeans, leaving a pale streak of dust. "Elara," she said. Her voice was just as I remembered it, low and steady like stones settling at the bottom of a river. "Chloe said you were coming." It wasn't a question. It was a simple statement of fact, devoid of pity or expectation. And for some reason, that made the knot of grief in my chest tighten until I could barely breathe. I had come here to be alone, to be a ghost in my sister's house. But a ghost can't exist if someone is there watching. The first 24 hours were a masterclass in mutual avoidance. I claimed jet lag, even though I'd only driven 3 hours, and barricaded myself in the guest room. I could hear the faint, rhythmic scrape of Anya's sanding from the back porch, a sound that became the backdrop to my wallowing. It was maddeningly consistent, a testament to a purpose I couldn't fathom. What was she even building? Why was she here? I felt a prickle of resentment. This was supposed to be my refuge, my space to be broken without an audience. Instead, I had a housemate whose quiet industry felt like a silent judgment on my inertia. I only emerged for water, moving like a thief through the shared spaces. Once I nearly ran into her in the hallway. She was coming from the bathroom, her hair damp, smelling of mint soap and something else. That same woody scent, now clean and sharp. She was closer than I'd expected, and I saw the flecks of gold in her dark brown eyes, the faint scar that bisected her left eyebrow. My heart gave a stupid, panicked little lurch. "Sorry," I mumbled, sidestepping her and fleeing back to my room. She said nothing, just inclined her head, giving me the space I was so desperately, rudely demanding. That night I couldn't sleep. The floral wallpaper seemed to writhe in the moonlight. I kept thinking about Sasha, about the apartment we'd shared that no longer felt like mine. I thought about her laughter, a sound I used to think I couldn't live without, and how it had curdled into something sharp and mocking in our final weeks. The pain was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest. I finally gave up and crept downstairs, hoping a cup of tea might quiet the frantic buzzing in my skull. The kitchen was dark, but a soft glow emanated from the living room. Anya was there, curled in Chloe's big armchair, a book open in her lap, a single lamp illuminating the page. She looked up as I entered, her expression soft with surprise. She wasn't wearing her work clothes, but a pair of worn sweatpants and an old college sweatshirt that was probably Chloe's. Without the armor of her work, she looked younger, more approachable. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked, her voice a low murmur. I just shook my head, my throat too tight for words. I busied myself with the kettle, my back to her, feeling her gaze on me. It wasn't invasive, just present. "Chloe's got some chamomile," she offered, "in the tin behind the coffee beans." I fumbled for the tin, my hands shaking slightly. It was a simple kindness, a small gesture of care, but it felt monumental. It was the first piece of unsolicited gentleness I'd received in a week. "Thanks," I managed, my voice raspy. She didn't press for conversation. She just went back to her book, leaving me to my tea making. We sat in silence for a long time, the only sounds the hum of the refrigerator and the whisper of a page turning. Her quiet companionship was strangely comforting. It wasn't demanding. It didn't require me to perform any version of myself. I was just a woman with a mug of tea, and she was just a woman with a book. And for a few minutes, the crushing weight in my chest eased just a little. I started to think that maybe, just maybe, I could survive having an audience after all. The next morning, Chloe called. Her voice was a crackling, energetic burst through the phone. "How are you? Are you settled? Did you find the good towels?" She fired off questions without waiting for answers. "Listen, I'm so sorry. This work thing is a mess. I'm not going to be back until Sunday. Are you okay with that? Is Anya being cool?" I looked out the kitchen window to where Anya was meticulously measuring a piece of lumber, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Yeah," I said, the word feeling inadequate. "She's fine. We're fine." I could feel Anya's presence even with the window between us. It was a solid, grounding thing in the chaotic swirl of my own emotions. "Good, good." I told her she could stay as long as she needed to finish up the bookshelves for me. Her landlord's a nightmare, so it worked out. "Don't be a hermit, Alara. Let her feed you. Her cooking is way better than mine." Chloe laughed, and the sound sent a pang of longing through me for a time when my life was simple enough to laugh like that. After we hung up, I stood by the window for a long time, stuck here, until Sunday, with her. The thought should have filled me with dread, but instead, a strange, unfamiliar feeling surfaced. Not hope exactly, but something less bleak than despair: curiosity. With Chloe's return pushed back, the house became our shared territory, a small island we had to learn to navigate together. The dynamic shifted from avoidance to a tentative, fragile truce. We were two celestial bodies caught in a quiet orbit, maintaining a careful distance but undeniably aware of each other's gravitational pull. I started spending less time in the guest room, drawn out by the smell of coffee in the morning or the low thrum of a podcast Anya would play while she worked. I'd sit at the kitchen table with my laptop, pretending to answer emails, but mostly I watched her. I learned the rhythm of her days. She rose with the sun, her routine simple and unhurried. Coffee, a quick check of her plans, and then out to the porch, where she worked with a kind of focused grace that I found mesmerizing. She wasn't just building bookshelves, she was coaxing a story out of the wood. The way her hands moved, strong, calloused, yet surprisingly gentle, was captivating. They knew the material, respected it. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. I found myself thinking about those hands, about what it would feel like if they touched me. The thought was a jolt, sharp and unwelcome. I was here to heal from a woman, not to start fantasizing about another one, especially not my sister's quiet, enigmatic best friend. I tried to be useful, to contribute something to the household besides my oppressive cloud of melancholy. I did the dishes, folded the laundry, even attempted to bake a disastrous batch of cookies that came out of the oven looking like sad, burnt little frisbees. Anya found me staring at them in dismay, a dusting of flour on my nose. I braced myself for a joke or worse, pity. Instead, she just picked one up, inspected it gravely, and took a bite. She chewed thoughtfully for a moment. "A little crunchy," she said, her lips twitching with the effort of not smiling. "But the flavor's there. Good charcoal notes." A laugh escaped me, a rusty, unfamiliar sound. It was the first time I'd laughed in weeks, and it felt like a muscle I'd forgotten how to use. "They're awful," I admitted, a real smile finally reaching my face. "Truly terrible." "Practice," she said, taking another bite. "It's all just practice." That small moment of shared, gentle humor shifted something between us. The air grew lighter. We started talking more, our conversations as tentative as my baking attempts. We stuck to safe topics: books, bad television, Chloe's terrible taste in music. I learned that she'd grown up a few towns over, that she'd apprenticed with an old cabinet maker after deciding architecture school wasn't for her. "I like making things you can touch," she explained one afternoon, running her hand over a freshly planed board. "Things that have a purpose, that feel solid." I thought about my own life, my job as a grant writer, a career built on words, on abstract concepts and promises. Nothing I made was solid. Nothing could be touched. Sasha had often called my work head in the cloud stuff, a phrase that had once sounded endearing and now just felt dismissive. I found myself noticing the smallest details about Anya, the way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, leaving a faint smudge of sawdust on her cheek, the low, humming sound she made in her throat when she was concentrating, her scent, a complex blend of cedar, coffee, and something uniquely her, something warm and clean that I was beginning to associate with a feeling of safety. My obsession with her hands grew. I watched them wrap around a coffee mug, grip a chisel, gesture as she spoke. I imagined them on the small of my back, tracing the line of my jaw, tangled in my hair. The fantasies were vivid and persistent, and they filled me with a confusing mix of shame and longing. I was supposed to be grieving. I was supposed to be a wreck. How could I be having these thoughts about a woman I barely knew? It felt like a betrayal of my own. Pain. A betrayal of the grand, tragic love story I'd been telling myself about Sasha. But my body didn't seem to care about the narrative. It responded to Anya's presence with a thrum of awareness that was impossible to ignore. Every time she entered a room, the energy shifted. Every time she looked at me with those steady, observant eyes, I felt seen in a way that was both terrifying and thrilling. The fragile truce was becoming something else, something more complicated and charged. The careful distance we'd maintained was shrinking, and I had no idea what would happen when it disappeared completely. The storm rolled in on Thursday afternoon, the day Chloe was originally supposed to return. It started with a low rumble in the distance, a darkening of the sky from pale gray to a bruised purple. Anya, ever practical, began securing her tools on the porch, covering her lumber with a heavy tarp. I stood by the screen door, watching her, a nervous energy buzzing under my skin. I'd always hated thunderstorms. They reminded me of my childhood, of hiding under the covers while my parents' arguments raged downstairs, their voices as loud and destructive as the thunder. "Looks like a bad one," Anya said, stepping inside and shaking the first few drops of rain from her hair. She looked at me, really looked at me, and her expression softened. "You don't like them, do you?" It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation, stated with the same calm matter-of-factness she applied to everything. I shook my head, feeling foolishly transparent. They make me anxious. The lights flickered once, twice, and then plunged us into a sudden, disorienting darkness. I let out a small, involuntary gasp. Outside, the sky cracked open. Rain hammered against the roof, and a brilliant fork of lightning illuminated the room for a split second, casting Anya's face in stark relief. In the ensuing boom of thunder, I flinched, my whole body tensing. A warm, solid presence was suddenly beside me. Anya's hand found my arm in the dark. Her touch was firm, grounding. "It's okay," she said, her voice low and close to my ear. "Just the power grid. It's old out here. It'll come back on or it won't. We've got candles." She didn't let go of my arm. Her thumb began to stroke the inside of my wrist, a slow, soothing rhythm that seemed to counteract the frantic pounding of my own heart. The darkness, which a moment ago had felt menacing, now felt intimate. It was a blanket, shutting out the world, leaving just the two of us and the sound of the storm. We found candles in a kitchen drawer and a book of matches. Anya lit them with a steady hand, placing them around the living room until the space was filled with a flickering golden light. The shadows danced on the walls, making the familiar room feel magical and strange. "Better?" she asked, her face illuminated by the flame of the last candle she lit. "Much," I admitted, my voice still a little shaky. We sat on the floor, leaning against the sofa, the storm raging outside our cozy cave of light. The pretense between us seemed to fall away in the dim, flickering light. There were no laptops to hide behind, no projects to focus on. There was just the quiet space between us. Sasha hated storms too, I heard myself say. The name hung in the air, the first time I'd spoken it to Anya. She'd get so angry, like the weather was a personal insult. Anya didn't say anything, just listened, her gaze unwavering. Her silence was an invitation. So I talked. I told her about Sasha, about the bright, brilliant beginning and the slow, painful erosion of our love. I told her about the little criticisms that became big ones, about feeling like I was always too much and never enough, about the way Sasha would withdraw affection as a punishment, leaving me in a cold, lonely silence that was worse than any fight. The last fight, it was about nothing, I said, my voice thick. A forgotten anniversary. I'd been working so much it slipped my mind. She said it was proof I didn't care, that I'd never really cared. She packed a bag and left that night. I finally looked at Anya, expecting to see pity in her eyes. Instead, I saw a deep, quiet empathy. "That's not nothing," she said softly. "Forgetting isn't the same as not caring." It sounds like she was looking for a reason. The simple validation was like a key, turning in a lock I didn't know was rusted shut. Tears I'd been holding back for a week began to spill down my cheeks. I didn't sob, just cried quietly, the tears tracking hot paths down my face. Anya didn't move to touch me, but she leaned a little closer, her presence a solid wall I could rest against without even touching. She let me cry until the storm inside me began to quiet, mirroring the storm outside, which was already softening to a steady, gentle rain. In that moment of shared vulnerability, surrounded by candlelight and the sound of rain, I felt more seen and understood than I had in the entire last year of my relationship with Sasha. The foundation of the wall I had so carefully constructed around my heart began to crumble. The power remained off for the rest of the night. The candlelight and the steady rhythm of the rain created a strange, timeless intimacy. After my confession, the silence that fell between us was different, no longer awkward or strained, but comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. We made sandwiches for dinner by candlelight, our movements synchronized in the small kitchen, and ate them sitting on the living room floor. I felt raw and exposed, but also lighter, as if speaking the truth about Sasha had released some of its toxic power. Anya, in turn, began to share pieces of herself. She told me about her family, about her frustrating but loving relationship with her father, who wanted her to take over his accounting firm instead of pursuing her passion for woodworking. "He thinks it's a hobby," she said, a wry smile playing on her lips. "He keeps sending me brochures for night school MBA programs." She spoke of a past relationship, a long-term one with a woman named Maria, an artist who was brilliant and passionate, but also deeply chaotic. "It was beautiful and exhausting," she said, her eyes distant, staring into a candle flame. "We burned so brightly, I think we just burned out. I learned a lot, mostly about what I don't want." She looked at me then, her gaze direct. "I want something quiet, something that feels solid. Like this," she said, knocking her knuckles softly on the hardwood floor. Her words resonated deep within me. Sasha and I had been a wildfire, a spectacular blaze that had consumed everything in its path and left nothing but ash. The idea of something quiet, something solid and enduring, felt like a drink of cool water after years of thirst. We talked for hours, our voices low in the dark. The stories we shared weren't grand or dramatic. They were small, human moments of disappointment, joy, and learning. We were mapping out the quiet, unseen landscapes of each other's lives. I found myself admiring not just her skill with her hands, but the careful, deliberate way she had built her life, the integrity that was evident in every choice she made. As the night wore on, I became acutely aware of our proximity. Our knees were almost touching. I could feel the warmth radiating from her body. Her scent, cedar and mint soap and rain, was all around me. I watched the way the candlelight caught the curve of her lip when she smiled, the way it deepened the shadows in the hollow of her throat. A powerful, undeniable current of attraction was flowing between us, as palpable as the humidity in the air. It was no longer a fantasy confined to my own head. It was a living thing in the room with us, in the charged space between our bodies. I wondered if she felt it too. I searched her face for a sign, a clue. Her expression was calm, her attention focused entirely on me. But there was a new intensity in her eyes, a darkness in her pupils that hinted at something deeper. The air grew thick with unspoken words, with possibilities that were both terrifying and exhilarating. The world had shrunk to this circle of candlelight, to the sound of her breathing, and the frantic, hopeful beat of my own heart. The storm had passed, but something far more powerful was just beginning to build. The next day, the power was still out. The world outside was washed clean, glistening and green after the storm. The air was cool and fresh. Inside, however, the atmosphere was thick with a new charged tension. The easy intimacy of our candlelit confessions had given way to a hyper-awareness that made every small gesture, every shared glance, feel significant. We were no longer just two people sharing a house. We were two women who had seen a glimpse of each other's souls, and the knowledge of it hung between us, shimmering and fragile. I couldn't stop thinking about the feeling of her thumb on my wrist, about the low timbre of her voice in the dark, about the way she'd looked at me when she said she wanted something solid. My mind replayed every moment, searching for meaning, for confirmation that the current I felt flowing between us wasn't just a product of my own lonely, hopeful imagination. I watched her as she inspected her work on the porch, running a hand over a piece of wood that had gotten damp in the storm. There was a slight frown on her face, a flicker of frustration. For the first time, she seemed less than perfectly composed. "It's warped," she said, her voice tight. "This whole piece is ruined." She sounded defeated. Seeing this crack in her calm facade made her feel more real, more human. "Can you fix it?" I asked, stepping out onto the damp porch. She shook her head, running a hand through her hair in frustration. "No, I'll have to start over. It'll set me back days. I was hoping to be finished before—" She trailed off, not finishing the sentence. "Before Chloe gets back." The unspoken words hung in the air. "Let me help," I said, the words surprising me as much as they seemed to surprise her. "I don't know what I'm doing, but I can lift things, or hold things, or just make you coffee." She looked at me, a flicker of surprise in her eyes, and then a small, grateful smile touched her lips. "Okay," she said. "You can help me clear this off. We'll have to go into town for new lumber." So we worked. For hours, we worked together. I held boards while she measured, handed her tools, and swept up piles of sawdust. We fell into a comfortable, nonverbal rhythm. The shared physical task was a relief, a way to channel the buzzing energy between us. But it only heightened my awareness of her. Her proximity was a constant, delicious torture. The scent of her sweat, clean and earthy. The brush of her arm against mine as we maneuvered a long plank. The way she'd look up and catch my eye, a silent question or a word of thanks passing between us. At one point, she was struggling to loosen a stubborn clamp. "Here," I said, moving behind her to get a better angle. I placed my hands over hers on the handle, my body pressing lightly against her back. I felt the heat of her, the solid strength of her muscles. Her breath hitched just for a second. My own heart hammered against my ribs. In that moment, the world narrowed to the feeling of her back against my chest, my hands over hers. Time seemed to stop. We were frozen there, barely breathing. It was an almost kiss, an almost confession, an almost everything. She finally broke the spell, pulling her hands away and clearing her throat. "Got it," she said, her voice a little rough. She didn't look at me. The tension was a wire pulled taut between us, humming with a frequency only we could hear. The recognition was absolute now. This wasn't just in my head. She felt it too, and that realization changed everything. The question was no longer if something was happening between us, but what we were going to do about it. The tension followed us into town. The drive to the lumber yard was mostly silent, but it was a silence filled with unspoken things. I was intensely aware of Anya in the driver's seat next to me, her strong hands on the steering wheel, her profile sharp and focused against the passing green landscape. I felt like a teenager with a crush, my stomach full of nervous butterflies. It was ridiculous. I was a grown woman, a woman who was supposed to be nursing a broken heart. Yet all I could think about was the woman beside me. All I wanted was to reach across the console and touch her. At the lumber yard, she moved with a confident expertise, her eyes scanning the stacks of wood, her hands testing the grain and weight of each board. She spoke to the yard manager in a language of grades and cuts that I didn't understand, but I loved listening to her. I loved watching her in her element, so capable and sure of herself. As we were loading the new planks into the back of her truck, my phone rang. It was Chloe. "Hey, just checking in. My flight is booked for Sunday morning. I'll be home by noon. Can't wait to see you. How are things with you and Anya? Are you driving each other crazy yet?" Her cheerful, oblivious voice was like a bucket of cold water. Sunday. She would be home on Sunday. Our time, this strange, suspended reality we were living in, had an expiration date, and it was coming up fast. "No, we're good," I said, my voice sounding strained to my own ears. I looked over at Anya, who was tying down the lumber. She had paused, her gaze fixed on me, her expression unreadable. She had heard Chloe's name. The reality of my sister, the reality of the world outside our little bubble came crashing in. Everything's fine. I hung up the phone, a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. The easy camaraderie of the morning was gone, replaced by a renewed sense of complication and consequence. Anya finished securing the load and turned to me, her face serious. "Sunday," she stated, not as a question. "Yeah," I said, my voice small. "Sunday." The drive back was even quieter than the drive there. The wire of tension between us was now laced with a new thread of urgency, of borrowed time. The unspoken question had changed. It was no longer just what we were going to do, but when. And we were running out of time. That evening, the air in the house was so thick with unspoken feelings, it was hard to breathe. We ate dinner in near silence, the clinking of our forks against the plates, sounding unnaturally loud. Every time our eyes met, it was like a spark jumping a gap, electric and dangerous. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, the wind at my back, my toes curled over the precipice. I could step back, retreat to the safety of my grief and my carefully constructed walls. Or I could jump. After dinner, I went out to the porch, needing air. The night was cool and clear, the sky littered with stars. The moon cast a pale, silvery light over the yard. Anya followed me out a few minutes later. She didn't say anything, just leaned against the porch railing a few feet away from me. The rhythmic chirping of crickets filled the silence. I could feel her looking at me, and I finally turned to meet her gaze. Her face was cast in the soft glow of the yellow porch light, her expression serious, searching. All the questions, all the tension, all the longing of the past few days seemed to culminate in this one charged moment. "Alara," she began, her voice low and rough. She stopped, shaking her head as if she couldn't find the right words. I didn't need words. I knew. I could see it in the intense vulnerability in her eyes, in the way she held herself so still, as if bracing for an impact. I closed the distance between us, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I stopped just in front of her, so close I could feel the heat coming off her skin, so close I could see the rapid pulse beating in her throat. "Anya," I whispered, my voice trembling. This was it, the jump. I raised a hand, my fingers shaking, and gently tucked a stray piece of hair behind her ear. Her skin was warm, soft. She closed her eyes at my touch, a shudder running through her. Her own hands came up to rest on my waist, her grip tentative at first, then firm, pulling me closer. "Don't tell anyone," she whispered, her voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. It wasn't a demand, it was a plea for this to be ours, a plea for a space, just for a moment, that wasn't complicated by Chloe, by Sasha, by the whole messy world, a space just for us. "Okay," I breathed, and then she kissed me. It wasn't a tentative, questioning kiss. It was a kiss of certainty, of pent-up longing finally unleashed. It was desperate and deep and utterly overwhelming. Her lips were soft and sure against mine, and she tasted of coffee and sawdust and something that was just her. I melted into her, my hands moving from her face to tangle in her hair, pulling her closer still. My body, which had felt numb and dead for so long, came alive under her touch. Her hands slid from my waist up my back, holding me to her as if she was afraid I might disappear. It was a kiss that felt like a confession, a homecoming, and a promise all at once. The world fell away. There was no porch, no night, no sister coming home on Sunday. There was only Anya, and the solid, grounding feel of her in my arms, and the breathtaking, terrifying, beautiful certainty that this was real. The dam hadn't just broken, it had been obliterated. We stumbled inside, our mouths still locked together, a trail of discarded shoes and frantic touches leading us down the hallway. The house, which had been a stage for our silent tension, was now a sanctuary for our newfound connection. Every touch was electric, every gasp a revelation. We ended up in her room, the one that was supposed to be Chloe's office, now filled with the scent of her. The moonlight streamed through the window, painting silver stripes across the floor and the simple mattress on the floor she'd been using. There was an urgency to our movements, born from days of restraint, but underneath it was a current of profound tenderness. She undressed me slowly, her calloused fingertips trailing fire across my skin. She looked at me, her gaze full of a reverence that made me feel beautiful for the first time in years. My body, which I had felt so disconnected from, so betrayed by its lingering grief, suddenly felt like my own again. It felt desired. When it was my turn, my hands shook as I unbuttoned her shirt. I wanted to map every inch of her with my hands, my lips. I wanted to learn the story her body told, the faint scar on her eyebrow, the freckles scattered across her strong shoulders, the taut line of her stomach. We fell onto the mattress together, a tangle of limbs and soft sighs. Making love to her was nothing like the wildfire I'd had with Sasha. It wasn't a frantic, consuming blaze. It was like the steady, warm glow of a hearth fire. It was slow and deep and sure. It was a conversation without words, a perfect, seamless reciprocity. She learned the rhythm of my body, and I learned hers. She held me afterwards, her arm a heavy, comforting weight across my waist, her breath warm on the back of my neck. I lay there, listening to the steady beat of her heart, feeling a sense of peace settle over me that was so profound it felt foreign. "Hey," she murmured into my hair, her voice thick with sleep. "You okay?" "More than okay," I whispered, turning in her arms to face her. In the pale moonlight, I could see the soft vulnerability on her face. I traced the line of her jaw with my finger. "I haven't felt like this, ever." It was the truth. The quiet solidity I felt lying there with her was something I had never known. She smiled, a sleepy, contented curve of her lips. "Me neither." We didn't talk about Chloe. We didn't talk about Sunday. We didn't talk about what would happen next. For now, it was enough to just be here, together, in the quiet dark. It was enough to know that this feeling, this connection, was real. The next morning, I woke up tangled in Anya's limbs, the early morning sun casting a warm glow across the room. For a blissful, disoriented moment, I didn't know where I was. There was only the feeling of her solid presence beside me, the scent of her skin, and a profound sense of rightness. Then memory rushed back in, the storm, the confessions, the kiss, the night. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. I felt light. The heavy cloak of grief I'd been carrying for weeks had lifted, replaced by a fragile, fluttering hope. Anya was still asleep, her face relaxed and peaceful. I watched the slow rise and fall of her chest, resisting the urge to touch her, to wake her. I wanted to memorize this moment, this feeling of quiet joy. I slipped out of bed and went to the kitchen to make coffee, my body feeling languid and alive. The house felt different. It was no longer just Chloe's house. It was the place where my life had unexpectedly, irrevocably shifted. As the coffee brewed, I looked out at the bookshelves on the porch. The ruined board was gone, replaced by fresh new lumber. A project started over. A new beginning. Anya found me there, leaning against the counter, a mug in my hand. She came up behind me and wrapped her arms around my waist, resting her chin on my shoulder. Her touch was easy, familiar. "Morning," she murmured, her voice husky with sleep. She pressed a soft kiss to my neck, and I leaned back into her, closing my eyes. "Morning," I said, my voice full of a warmth I hadn't heard in it for a long time. We stood like that for a few minutes, just holding each other, the silence comfortable and full. There were things we needed to talk about, big, complicated things. Chloe, our lives outside this bubble, the future. But in this moment, all that mattered was the simple, solid fact of us. "We need to figure this out," she said eventually, her voice serious. "Chloe—" "I know," I said, turning in her arms to face her. I looked into her steady brown eyes. "But not yet. Can we just have today?" She searched my face for a moment, and then a slow smile spread across her lips. "Yeah," she said, her voice soft. "We can have today." We made a plan. We would tell Chloe. Together. Not right away, not the second she walked in the door, but soon. We owed her that. We owed ourselves that. We would face the complications head on, as a team. The first concrete action was deciding that I wouldn't flee back to my old city right away. I would stay. I'd find a short-term rental nearby, give this thing between us a real chance to grow, to build something solid, away from the shadows of my past and the complications of my sister's house. It was a small step, but it felt huge. It was a choice. It was a commitment to this new, unexpected path. The rest of the day passed in a beautiful, idyllic blur. We worked on the bookshelves together, our movements easy and synchronized, our conversation punctuated by shared smiles and light touches. We took a long walk in the woods behind the house, our hands clasped together. Everything felt new, vibrant. I was seeing the world through different eyes. The future was still a vast, unknown territory. But for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't afraid of it. I was looking forward to it because I knew I wouldn't be facing it alone. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard, we sat on the porch steps, leaning against each other, watching the sky turn from blue to orange to a deep, velvety purple. The porch light flickered on, the same light that had illuminated our first kiss. It felt like a beacon, a symbol of the moment everything changed. I knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be awkward conversations, hurt feelings, logistical nightmares. But looking at Anya, at the quiet strength in her profile, at the gentle way she held my hand, I knew we could handle it. What we had found here, in this quiet house, in the aftermath of a storm, was real. It was something worth fighting for. It was something solid. It was a quiet love, built not on a consuming fire, but on the steady, patient work of two people choosing to build something beautiful and lasting, piece by piece. When you've spent so long believing love has to be a destructive storm, how do you learn to trust the quiet safety of a harbor? If you've ever found an unexpected peace in the arms of someone new, like this story, subscribe for more, and let me know in the comments what you think it means to build a love that lasts.